We're ready to put our production possibility frontiers together to show how specialization can improve production outcomes. All right, so here I've just put in the farmer's PPF and the rancher's PPF to simplify what we need to do in order to plot the joint production possibility frontier. But whenever you're plotting the joint production possibility frontier, I would recommend first starting with the two individual production possibility frontiers. So basically what we're trying to do is think about how much meat and potatoes can be produced if the farmer and rancher combine resources and specialize their production. In other words, the farmer will focus on producing potatoes and the rancher will focus on producing meat. So we're going to join these two production possibility frontiers together. Just like before, it's easiest to think first about the extremes. So if both people spend all their time producing meat, the farmer will produce 2 pounds, the rancher will produce 40, and total we'll have 42 pounds of meat and no potatoes. Likewise, if both people produce potatoes, we'll have 4 pounds from the farmer, 5 pounds from the rancher for a total of 9 pounds of potatoes, but no meat. So those are 2 points on our joint production possibility frontier, but we need a third point to join the 2 lines together. And this point I like to call the point of specialization. It is the point where each person spends all of their time producing the good for which they have a comparative advantage. In other words, they specialize their production. So in this case, that means that the farmer should produce only potatoes. The rancher should produce only meat. And we will get 40 pounds of meat and 4 pounds of potatoes. And here we have the point of specialization. Now, connecting these 3 points gives us the joint production possibility frontier, which really is a joining of our 2 individual production possibility frontiers. And you can see that because the farmer's production possibility frontier is here, and the rancher's production possibility frontier is here. We've joined them together, but we've joined them together in a very specific way where each person specializes according to comparative advantage. To see that, we want to think about, say, starting here at this point with all meat and no potatoes. If we have all meat and no potatoes, maybe somebody is like, I want a potato. Who should produce that potato? Who should produce the first pound of potatoes? The farmer, right? Of course, the farmer, because the farmer produces at a lower cost than the rancher. So you can see that this production possibility frontier has a lower slope, right? A smaller slope in magnitude than the rancher's much steeper production possibility frontier. And what does that mean? It means that in order to get the first pound of potatoes, we give up less meat than if the rancher produced that pound of potatoes. So the basic idea here is that if we want to produce potatoes as a society, we do so by producing at the lowest cost. regardless of who will end up consuming the potatoes, right? Maybe the rancher wants the potatoes. The farmer should still produce them, because in the end, that way we end up as a society with both more meat and more potatoes than if the rancher gave up 8 pounds of meat just to produce that 1 pound of potatoes. All right, so we line up the production possibility frontiers here, basically from the flattest slope to the steepest, because the slope, remember, represents the cost of production. And as we start producing potatoes, we want to do so at the lowest cost. Does that mean the farmer will only produce potatoes and the rancher will only produce meat? No. It does not mean that we are necessarily here at this point of specialization. It does mean that if anyone is producing potatoes, the farmer will be the first one, right, to produce potatoes. If we want 1 pound, 2 pounds, 3 pounds, 4 pounds, farmer is producing potatoes. If we want more potatoes than 4, then the rancher must begin producing potatoes because the farmer is out of time, okay? But we've exhausted the lowest cost method of production first. That's what we mean by specialization. Okay, so we want to see if this indeed has improved outcomes for us. So we're going to use our criteria of efficiency to compare our point of production without specialization to this joint production possibility frontier. So if you remember from the previous video, we have found that without specialization, if both people spend half their time producing meat and half their time producing potatoes, we end up with 21 pounds of meat and 4.5 pounds of potatoes. So somewhere like here. I'll just label that point A. So A is the point with no specialization, where they each devoted half their time to producing each good. Now, what do we notice about A? A is below our joint production possibility frontier. That means that A is inefficient. In other words, we could, compared to that point A, get more meat, more potatoes, or more of both. So as a society, we can produce more of everything through specialization. This is a powerful finding because remember, this doesn't even take into account the fact that you have different skills than I do. You're better at things than I am, and I'm better at some things than you. So we can benefit from specialization in that way as well. We can also benefit from specialization in that the more I practice something, the better I get at it, right? So there are other benefits to specialization outside of this kind of comparative advantage explanation. But this shows us in the most basic case, even when we don't get better at things, even when one person is just worse at everything, we still benefit from specialization and trade. So specialization makes us clearly better off in production because it allows us to produce more of everything without, I guess I should say with the same resources, right? We haven't used any more time here. So in our world with scarce resources, the way that we get the most value out of those resources is to specialize. Now, this lecture started out about trade. and specialization and trade are intricately linked. Because without trade, we won't want to specialize. There's no reason that the farmer wants to produce only potatoes if he would also like to consume some meat, unless he can trade potatoes for meat. So specialization requires trade. And the more we can trade with each other, the more we're able to specialize.